the most brutal businessman in history. Cornelius' ancestors had originally come to America as servants, so Cornelius' rise from nothing to unimaginable wealth and power is truly fascinating. At the age of just 11 years old, Cornelius dropped out of school and went to work on his father's ferry in New York Harbor, which transported goods across the river. After learning the trade, Cornelius wanted to start his own business doing the same kind of thing. His mother was a farmer, and whilst she didn't have a lot of money, she had some savings which she agreed to loan to her son, $100 to be exact. Which would be enough for him to buy his own small sailboat. There was one caveat though: in order for Cornelius to get the loan from his mum, he had to clear an extremely rocky field so that she could farm it. Cornelius had always had an extremely strong work ethic, and so he immediately agreed, but it soon became clear removing so many rocks from the field was going to take too long. So, he managed to convince other local kids to help him with the job, and in return he promised they'd get free rides on his new boat. Together they cleared the field, so his mum gave him the $100 loan, and Cornelius bought his first boat at the age of just 16. Cornelius then began transporting both freight and passengers, between Staten Island and Manhattan. Of course, there was plenty of competition from other ship owners doing the same thing. But Vanderbilt's strategy was to undercut everyone else, and offer the cheapest fares on the market. He quickly gained a reputation for his reliable and affordable ferry services. And, here's the crucial bit, after repaying back his mother for the loan, he reinvested all the profits he made back into the business. This meant he soon was able to buy another ship. And then another ship. This is basically the capitalist blueprint for success. It's really not that different to how Jeff Bezos built Amazon. And because Cornelius worked so relentlessly hard, it wasn't long before he had a whole fleet of ships transporting both people and goods across a variety of different routes. When the American government gave him a lucrative contract to help transport soldiers on his ships. Somehow though, despite working such long hours, at the age of 19 Cornelius found time to marry his cousin, and later went on to have 13 children with her. By the late 1820s, Cornelius had identified how to step his business up to another level: steamboats. He knew the steamboat technology was much more efficient than the ships he'd been using, and so he began investing heavily into buying steamboats instead. And once again, he used the same tactics that he had with his sailboats. Initially undercutting every single competitor so that he had the cheaper prices, and thus stole all their customers. These ruthless tactics did indeed bankrupt several other business owners. But in many cases, Cornelius would simply buy their businesses at a reduced price, once the ship owners realized they couldn't compete with Cornelius' pricing. His lack of school education didn't help there either, as Cornelius struggled to write properly. And the way he looked and spoke was certainly not like how most of the upper class looked and spoke. But Cornelius used his working class beginnings to his advantage. He advertised his ships as the people's line, affordable ships for normal everyday people. After gold was discovered in California, literally hundreds of thousands of people were traveling there hoping to get rich, the largest mass migration in American history. But California wasn't yet linked to the rest of the country by rail, and Cornelius wanted to cash in on this, so he immediately began offering boat trips to California. Of course, several other people did too, but where Cornelius differentiated himself is that he found a new route to California via Nicaragua, which was about 600 miles shorter than the route via Panama everyone else was using. He agreed an exclusive deal with the government of Nicaragua, and a result, Cornelius' trips were faster and cheaper than the competition, and thus he attracted far more customers. But in 1853 Cornelius did something that he'd basically never done before. He took a vacation. He was about to turn 60 years old and had been working pretty much non-stop ever since he was a kid. So he decided to finally have a proper break and bought a gigantic yacht to go on a tour of Europe with his family, and immediately, everything went wrong. He'd left management of his new transport business in Nicaragua to two men called Morgan and Garrison, who were partners in the business, but they ended up betraying him, and making a shady deal with the new president of Nicaragua, a man named William Walker who'd forcefully taken charge of the country. The deal basically meant Cornelius' exclusive rights to operate his ships throughout the country would instead be given to just Morgan and Garrison instead. When Cornelius found out, he sent them one of the shortest and most ominous letters ever. "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you for the law is too slow. I'll ruin you. Yours truly, Cornelius Vanderbilt." And that's exactly what he did. Cornelius immediately set up another transit company nearby and used his classic trick of offering ridiculously low prices to steal customers. He then refused to transport passengers to or from Nicaragua to create a blockade of the country. He also convinced the nearby countries to not recognize Walker's new government. And eventually, he helped start a war to completely overthrow the new government in Nicaragua. Now, by this point Cornelius was nearly 60 years old. And when most people get to the age of 60 they're looking to retire, and wind down for a more relaxed life. But not Cornelius. He was about to monopolize an entirely different industry. He realized more and more shipments were happening not by boat, but by train, and so if he wanted to continue to dominate transportation, that's where he needed to focus. So, Cornelius began selling off his fleet of ships, and instead began investing in railroads. Now until Cornelius got involved in the railroad business, there were a huge amount of different railway services that were independently owned. But Cornelius started connecting railroads between different regions, and building an interconnected network. He wanted to consolidate all these different railways into one giant railroad empire, and by doing this, he began to build a monopoly in railroad transportation. But around this time, Cornelius grew increasing ill and became bedridden. Despite his weakened state, he was still his usual fiery aggressive self. At the time of his demise, his fortune was worth around $100 million, but adjusting for inflation, that today would have been around $200 billion. It's estimated that on paper, he had around 1/9 of all the American currency in circulation at the time. And yet despite that, he lived a relatively modest life. He consistently plowed almost all his income, and his time, into his business. When he passed away, around 90% of his fortune went to his oldest and favorite son, and then he split the rest between his other many children, most of which he viewed as weak and undeserving.